All right. Hey, hello everyone. Thank you again for joining a Tips and Tricks webinar. Today's topic is on on-prem management to migrating it to Smart-1 Cloud. So please use the Q&A chat if you have any questions. We'll get to those during the webinar. Presenter today is a security engineer from right here in Pennsylvania, Michael Ibarra. Michael, what do you have for us today?
All right, thanks, Rob, and thanks everyone for joining. It's my real pleasure to be bringing you this topic today and sharing you some of the real world lessons that I've learned in my own experimentation and in conversations with customers and various other scenarios. You know, Smart-1 Cloud is a relatively new product that Checkpoint has obviously made available, but it's also been in place in a pretty wide playing field because of how widely it's been deployed by a lot of different customers. And while we have a lot of great documentation, one of the areas that I ran into recently was understanding the specific steps around migrating an on-premise clustered group of gateways into Smart-1 Cloud. And that process is something that I am eager to show you today. I've got a lab environment that I'm going to be walking through some of the steps, giving you some tips on things to watch for, some specific details to be mindful of. So yes, as Rob mentioned, please feel free to use the Q&A. We'll certainly have some time as we go through this to address your questions. So with that, I am going to pause my screen share for a moment while I jump over and grab my my main window. So bear with me for just a moment. All right, so right here, I have the Infinity dashboard, which if you're not familiar with, this is the main environment where Checkpoint's Smart-1 Cloud runs. So you may be familiar with the Infinity dashboard from using products like Harmony Email and Collaboration or Endpoint perhaps, or maybe even CloudGuard. Smart-1 Cloud is an environment that lives under the Quantum vertical. And it is precisely what it sounds like. It's a virtualized instance of our traditional smart management server that lives inside of Checkpoint's environment here in the cloud. Obviously, there's a number of benefits because it's a software as a service. You don't have to worry about things like upgrading or patching or maintaining the infrastructure to run the underlying hardware or the environment. And one of the reasons I really love it is because it gives you a lot of flexibility around administering your gateways and all the in-between areas as well. So right now I have a demo environment, as you can see up here, that I've spun up. My tenant is really just starting off here vanilla. I don't have any logging information. You can see that my smart management instance is active. I'm running version 81.20, which is obviously the latest here. And if I go to my policy view for a moment, you'll probably see that, yeah, this is pretty much vanilla. In fact, this is the default policy configuration that you would get out of the box on a traditional smart management server. So when you start up Smart-1 Cloud, you have the option to start fresh, as if you're building a brand new environment from scratch. It's greenfield. Maybe you don't have any gateways attached to it, and you can certainly do that. But the subject we're talking about here today is migrating an existing set of gateways into Smart-1 Cloud. So we're going to step over here to gateways just to show you that, again, we're not actually using anything right now. There's nothing registered. There's no communication happening between this environment and the gateways. The area that we're going to focus on here is under settings, and then under migrate. And this is the very first step that we generally pursue when we are taking a look at an on-prem environment that we want to move into Smart-1 Cloud. And there's really two steps here. The first step is downloading a script that we are going to supply. And that script has all of the instructions and the configuration that our existing smart management server needs in order to successfully export all the data, including the policy, including the details about the gateways, even secure initialization communication. all of that information is bundled up inside of a tar gzip file that we can then correspondingly come back here, select it from our computer, and then upload it. And that process is essentially, if you've ever done a migrate export from one management server to another, it's very, very, very similar. So we're going to step through some of this here, but before we do that, I'd like to show you the existing environment that I have with my current on-prem management server. So this is a lab that I've built here. It's very simple. There's not a whole lot of exciting stuff happening, but you can see this is my SMS object with this IP address, privately, of course. This is my cluster of gateways that I have. And of course, we have the cluster object. And inside the cluster object, of course, we have a number of blades that are enabled. We've got our IP address. If I were to go ahead and check SIC for the members, you would see that that's established. Under network management as well, I've got a couple of different networks here that are, again, just very basic. We've got an external, and you'll have to kind of imagine a little bit with me that this is an external network, even though it's privately addressed. Imagine this is actually an east-west firewall, and it makes a little more sense. This is another network. This is maybe a DMZ network. And then, of course, we have our sync interface. So again, very simple policy. We've got our management rules here at the top in a number of layers. Or a single layer rather, with a number of different rules. We've got a couple of just dummy rules here and then our cleanup at the very bottom. So what we're wanting to do throughout this process is take this entire policy, all of the configuration, all of the network objects that we've defined, in fact, which includes things like some of the custom ones I've made, these guys here in particular, and we want to make sure that all of this configuration makes its way up to Smart-1 Cloud. And again, the way that we do that is through generating that tar gzip export file. So I'm going to go ahead and download this file. I'll give you a quick look as to what this looks like once we grab it. And there it is. So I have this bash script, in essence, called Maz Export Tools, the name of my Smart-1 Cloud tenant, and then, of course, the identifier here at the end. So if I go to WinSCP, which is what I'm going to use to transfer this file over, spoiler alert, I actually already ran this previous to this this session here, because this process, when it's all said and done, takes a little bit over an hour, and I don't think you want to just sit and watch this spin like watching paint dry. But that's all right. I'm going to show you what this looks like, even if we were going to take a look at this ourselves. So if I take a look at my files that I just downloaded here, we're going to go in here, refresh. This is the file that I literally just grabbed from my from my Smart-1 Cloud environment. And if we take this and we go over to our gateway view, or I'm sorry, our smart management view, I have that up here in a SSH session. The file that we're interested in here is the one with the timestamp that matches us, 1109, if you're on the East Coast with me here. That file is, interestingly enough, I don't know if anyone's ever maybe looked at this. I don't think I actually checked this myself until recently, but what's interesting about this file is it is actually a base 64 encoded set of instructions about what to do once this command runs. What's amazing about this file is that it's 12 megabytes, thousands and thousands of lines of base 64 encoded characters. Obviously, we do that for security, for making sure we encrypt and obscure the specific steps that we're going to be taking on the gateway side. But if we take a look back at our instructions here, there's two steps we need to do first. We need to change the permissions essentially on this script so that it is executable. So this +X means make this script executable. So if I go back here and I look at my permissions as they are right now, we can see that owner has read write, group has read, and everyone else has nothing. So let's fix that. Let's do chmod +X followed by the name of our script. And if I do that, I now look at my permissions again, and you can see that they've changed. Owner now has read write execute. Group has read but not write, but it does have execute. So if I wanted to, I would hit NAS export tools, MicroLib demo 2, and I would hit enter. Once I do that, that begins a process of taking all of the database information on this server, packaging it up inside that tar gzip file, and then ultimately spitting out that final result. And because I did this earlier in the morning, you can see right here, this is actually the result that I'm going to end up with. So you see the tar gzipped extension, the file size is fairly large, 137 megabytes. There's a log as well that tells me the results of what happened in that process. And once I have that tar gzip file, again, I would go back to my portal, I would choose the file, and I would hit upload and start. Now, just a couple of notes here. Once you are running through this process, and once you begin that export procedure with this script, keep in mind that the gateways are still connected to your on-premise smart management server, okay? So even as you are exporting this, even as you're doing a migrate export, the gateways are continuing to communicate with the SMS. Now, one quick note to make here. You might have noticed that I am on version 81.20 for all of these different objects here. I think I can probably see the version of my systems here. Yeah, it's one of these, but oh, you know what? It's right in front of me. Here it is. Duh. So 81.20 is what I'm moving from. Because our Smart-1 cloud was already listed at 81.20, there's no version change. I'm going from 81.20 to 81.20. In fact, I can open up the upgrade report, which is also generated when that export process succeeds. And you can see, sure enough, the version I'm going is from 81.20 to 81.20. The reason I'm mentioning that is when you're going from the same version to the same version, source destination, we do not require a CP stop to be run before the export starts. That's an advantage because you don't have to worry about logs being queued locally on the gateways. You don't have to worry about certificate-based authentication failing for remote access VPN users. If you are moving from a version like 80.40 to 81.20, at least on that version from testing that I've done, we do run a CP stop. So just keep in mind that if you are going from a version like 80.40 to 81.20, from on-prem management to Smart-1 Cloud, that is going to require a CP stop. Just a quick note in case it's on your radar, maybe it's not, maybe it is. 80.40 is considered end of support coming up here, I think in January of 2024. So another reason that I know some people are moving to Smart-1 Cloud is, the advantage of saying, I don't want to upgrade my on-prem management server from 80.40 to 81.20. I'm just going to do the move, and the upgrade is effectively going to be taken care of for me. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that as you are here in the migrate view, once you hit upload and start, that is really the point of no return in terms of the impact to beginning to use Smart-1 Cloud. Now, like I said, the gateways are still attached to the management server, so it's not going to impact any traffic flow or throughput of different destinations being reached from any source machines. But it really is, at this point, the moment to say, okay, this is really pressing that button and continuing and moving forward. So once we do that, again, this process takes about an hour. So I am not going to make you sit through that, but instead what I'm going to do is jump over here to a different demo environment that I have also been working on this morning. And I'd like to show you the import process after it's been completed here. So again, we're on a different demo environment. If I go to policy here, what we're going to see is a pretty similar picture to what we had there previously. So if I take a look at these rules, and I look through the management layer, got these different rules listed here, different objects, different behaviors, that should match verbatim what I have here inside of Smart-1, or Smart Console rather. And sure enough, it does. There's our management layer. We've got NTP, dynamic object here for checkpoint services. Again, we'll take a closer look here. And sure enough, there's our object. So this looks really good. You might be asking, okay, you've exported the policy, you've imported it to Smart-1 Cloud, but what now? You said that those gateways are still attached to our management object on-prem, and that is true. And there's one additional step that we need to do here that's super important to complete this process. If I go over to my Connect Gateways view, by default, whenever you run the import after exporting the database, you're not going to see anything in here. And you might say, well, hold on, I should see gateways listed here. Didn't I import my information, and don't I have that already here set up? The answer is yes, you do, but there's a step we need to follow in order to activate those. And that's what I'm going to show you now. So if we click this plus sign here, we're going to go down to use existing gateway. We're going to choose one of the gateways in the list. Obviously, this corresponds to one of the 2 cluster members that I have. And I'm going to click register here. This begins generating essentially a script that will tell this gateway from the command line, I want you to attach yourself to Smart-1 Cloud. We'll look at this in a moment. Before we do that, I'm going to go back into that same plus menu, plus sign rather, and I'm going to do the same thing for gateway 2. I'm going to register that guy as well. And in a few moments, we should see these registration processes completed. I'm just going to refresh the page. Sometimes it finishes, but doesn't quite update. Let's see what we get here if we do that. Okay, perfect. So this gateway is actually ready in terms of the object config here in Smart-1 Cloud. And before we hit go here, I'm going to click these 3 dots and hit view instructions. And you have a couple of options here depending on the version your security gateway is running. Now, on my system, on these gateways, if I open up one of the ones that I have here and I just take a look at my version, you saw this probably from Smart Console, but you can see here that I am running 81.20, hotfix take 26. So we are in good shape there to begin this process. If you were running something like 80.40 or an earlier version, notice that this command syntax changes slightly when you go back to a previous version. And that's fine. You just need to make sure that you are copying the correct command as it corresponds to the gateway version you have. So I'm going to choose 81 and onwards. I can click this little icon here to copy this command. It's only going to copy this, by the way, not the gateway and the little sideways arrow. If I go to my CLI for my gateway itself, I'm going to take a look at my interfaces readout here. And the reason I want to show this to you first is so you can see what my interface configuration looks like before I run this command. After I run this, you're going to see a new interface appear specifically for tunneling securely up to Smart-1 Cloud. And that's the mechanism that Smart-1 Cloud uses to talk back to the gateway and vice versa. So again, I'm going to paste, well, not that, I must have copied the wrong command. Let's try it again. All right, there it is. There's my command. I'm going to set that command. I'm going to hit go. And there it is. So I am sitting here waiting, wanting to make sure, you know what, actually, sorry about that. I need to be in glitch mode, don't I? Because here's my command and this little sideways arrow. You know, we do this live. You never know what's going to happen on some of these sessions. So we do it live. Okay. So I hit enter. You can see my cursor is just sort of sitting there. There's a number of things happening in the background right now that you're going to see in a moment once this command completes and we see the output. I'm going to let that run for a moment. I'm going to flip back here. Okay, my second gateway is also ready. So I'm going to go and grab my instructions for this one as well. And I'm going to flip back to my CLI. I'm going to go ahead and run this command, and then I'm going to flip back over to my other gateway to see the results. All right, so here's where I ran that command, and here's exactly what happened in the background. There was an implied rule for management as a service. That's what MAS stands for. an implied rule that was added so that the gateway can talk with Smart-1 Cloud at all times. The gateway IP address, this is actually a privately reserved address range that isn't used by any public entity out there on the internet, so we can utilize it. And you can see there's a number of different steps that run here. The thing that we want to see is MAS tunnel is up. And sure enough, if we go and we hit the up arrow, actually, before we do that, let's jump back to Bash. And I would like to see, in particular, this command, which is going to show me my interfaces. And remember, I mentioned that there's a new interface that's added. And sure enough, management as a service tunnel has this IP address. And this is what we would now actually see in Smart Console in a little bit. Likewise, if I go over here to my second gateway, I see again that my MAS tunnel has come up after running that command, which is great. I'm going to exit that, take a look at my interface list, and as well, my MAS tunnel on this gateway is also established and up. And you can see the address here. This one's 202, this one's 203. All right, so that's great. That's exactly what we want to see. I'm going to jump back over here, and we're going to take a closer look. Here we see the registration is completed, which is fantastic. That's precisely what we want. Now, the next step at this point could be pushing policy, could be validating that we are in good shape to begin essentially running with Smart-1 Cloud exclusively. But what I want to take a closer look at first is I want to make sure that SIC is established, is still healthy, that the gateways are communicating. After all of that is true, then we can push policy and we can make sure that this is functioning the way we would expect it to. And there are two different ways to attach to the gateways or Smart Console, I should say, using Smart-1 Cloud. There is what's called a streamed Smart Console. This is actually a real-time app streaming technology that we use behind the scenes. This is totally fine. We can certainly use that, especially if you're on a system like Mac OS or Linux where you don't have a native Smart Console install. That's a great option. I'm actually going to show you what it looks like to run this natively inside Smart Console. So I'm going to close Smart Console here for a moment on my local machine. I'm going to open it back up. And I could connect directly to my Smart Management server on-prem, but that's not really going to help me because at this point, I want to begin using Smart-1 Cloud. So to do that, I'm going to choose Cloud right here. I'm going to copy this connection token, which is essentially a set of authorization characters that allows me to connect securely up to Smart-1 Cloud. The next step that I'm going to do here is click Infinity Login, which is going to prompt me to log in within the Infinity dashboard. So this will actually open up another window here in a moment behind us. And you'll see what that looks like momentarily. The reason we do this is because if somebody were to somehow steal your connection token and try to make a connection to it using their machine or environment, we don't want that to automatically just load. We want to make sure that you are able to log in yourself, that you're authorized, that you have the permission to do that before proceeding. You'll notice that this is saying, hey, you already have a session open. Do you want to take over? And we would say yes. The reason I'm being told this is because within policy here, this actually counts as a live administrative session. So I'm going to hit proceed. All that does is takes over again that policy session that I had within that view. And in a couple of moments, I'm going to be loading Smart-1 Cloud as if I'm running it natively here inside of Smart Console. All right, so while that launches, we're gonna, actually here we are. So we're gonna see, again, the same, hopefully the same policy. If I open this up here, again, what I'm doing is I'm looking at my Smart-1 Cloud instance that represents the policy that I've just imported from my on-prem management server. And you'll notice that everything looks exactly as it did when it was on-prem, because sure enough, all of these rules, all of these objects, remember we took a look at the networks that we had defined here manually, all of these still exist because, of course, We've done the export and the import. What I want to take a look at, though, is the gateways themselves, because that's where we've had a number of changes. And this, when I first saw it, kind of threw me for a loop, but I want to just point something out here to make sure we spend a moment on it. You'll notice the IP address of these gateways correspond to the management addresses on that tunnel that I showed you earlier. Remember, this is 26.203 for gateway 2 and 26.202 for gateway 1. So those match. But what's going on here with this cluster address? That's still the same private cluster address. And the answer for that is a cosmetic detail that has no bearing on the function of the cluster itself. Looks a little bit weird, I agree, but this is something that is almost sort of an artifact left over from when this cluster was managed on premise. So just be aware that at first glance looks a little strange, but that is actually an expected behavior based on how this cluster is configured and operating in Smart-1 Cloud. Okay, so I've got my cluster here. I've got the gateways. Let's double check SIC to make sure that that is healthy. I'm going to go in, look at communication. I see that that's established, but I'm still going to test it anyway to make sure. And sure enough, I'm communicating. So we are literally talking backwards across that tunnel to the gateway locally and make sure that we still have trust established from my management server issuing that certificate originally when we were on-prem. Let's do the same test with gateway 2. And here again, I'm going to test. And there we are, communicating again. So that's excellent. I think based on that, we are ready to push policy. But before we do that, I'd like to make a change to make sure that any change that I'm making here inside of my new environment is reflected. So I'm actually going to add a brand new NAT rule at the very top. And the reason I'm doing that is because I have a rule here down towards the bottom that says, hey, if you're going from DMZ to an internal network, well, actually, you're not allowed to do that, so that doesn't work. But let's say from internal to DMZ, these are the services I'm allowed to communicate over. I'm going to add a NAT exclusion rule that says if I'm going from here to here, don't NAT that traffic. So to do that, I have a network object group, I believe, that I can use for that exact purpose. And here I've got an internal nets group that contains those two networks themselves. If I use that in this rule, that's essentially saying from either of these two sources to either of these two destinations, I don't want you to NAT that because we're keeping the same source and the same destination. I'm going to publish that change. Do a little bit of auditing work there, publish, and then we are going to move immediately over to installing that policy. But before I click install policy, there's a handy command that I like to use whenever I'm doing this sort of thing. I don't know if you've ever seen maybe the watch command, but this is a great Linux shell command that allows you to monitor the output of a command by default every 2 seconds. The dash D will highlight differences every 2 seconds when that command is refreshed. And the command I'm going to run is fwstat, which is going to show me my installed policy. You can see the policy version was from this morning at 6:38 Eastern time. And what I want to see is the same date, but an updated time here with the most recent timestamp. You can see this is refreshing every 2 seconds with fwstat. So now that that's running, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to install policy. And I'm going to first run access control without threat prevention. That's a required step whenever you're doing a policy install for the first time from a smart management server. So I'm going to hit install. And as that runs here, I'm going to see if maybe I can bring that other window to the foreground and we can have a look there while that is running. So the first installation of this sometimes can take up to about 60 seconds. So I'm just going to leave this up and center here for us while that completes. But while we're waiting, I know we're almost at about time here, but Rob, any questions at all from the Q&A or areas that maybe I can speak to while we're paused here?
Absolutely. My first question is actually from me. When you were back at the beginning there and you said once you click that import, you called it the point of no return.
Right.
Why is it the point of no return?
Right. That's a great question. So it's a great question. I think because of the work that someone or you have done up until that point, hopefully your policy on your management server has a change freeze. Hopefully at that point, you're ready to commit to Smart-1 Cloud. Does that mean that you can back out or that you can't back out or restart? No, you certainly can. But at that point, you've made a number of changes to your environment that really require you to commit on the gateway side, especially as you're going to be then connecting them to your management server. There are a couple of tweaks that you have to make to sort of almost revert back to being in a state where you can manage using your on-prem or your previous smart management server. So I mentioned it's a point of no return because really at that point, you've made the changes up to that step to be able to cut over. And it's really something that is a little more difficult to back out of.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Question here. When is the right time to shut down the on-prem server? You're doing this.
That is also a great question. Yeah, that's also a great question. So again, reverting back to an on-prem server is not impossible. You know, the gateways right now are connected up to Smart-1 Cloud. If for some reason you wanted to revert back to the on-prem management server, I would definitely say engaging TAC for that would be a great first step. Theoretically, you should be able to break sick and reestablish with your on-prem server, push policy, and be back up and running. But I would say if you are confident that your gateways are connected, you've pushed policy, you're getting logs, you're happy with what it looks like, I would say shutting down your on-prem server can be done at any time, but it doesn't necessarily need to be done right away because, again, that server is just sitting there waiting, not really doing a whole lot because it's no longer communicating directly with the gateways and it's simply functioning as a rollback safety net, essentially, if you will.
Right. And sticking with the existing management server, can it still be used? Paul, I'm not sure exactly what you're stating there. If you want
Can it
to
still be
elaborate.
used? Yeah. So once you do the export process and you really join those gateways to Smart-1 Cloud, at that point, your management server that was on-prem really has no more control or any involvement at all between the gateways and Smart-1 Cloud. So it becomes essentially a previous copy. I suppose you could, obviously redeploy it, reimage, set it up as an alternate system. I have not tried, for instance, setting it up as an alternate logging server, for something like smart event correlation. Like if you wanted to have a local smart event system, but maybe your primary management inside of Smart-1 Cloud. I have not tried that. That's an interesting idea. That would be interesting to maybe do a little bit of research on and try to determine if that's possible. But I would say at the surface, I have not come across a scenario where you would really reuse that server on premise. It's really meant to be a transition from your old Smart-1 environment to Smart-1 Cloud. And that's really where you end up doing your work and where you end up proceeding from there.
Right. And obviously talk to your local account team if you're going through this process. It depends on your environment, what it can be used for, if it can be traded back in. There's a lot of options. It's not just a dead piece of hardware. It's not a doorstop at that point. It still has value. So talk to your account team and what applies to you.
Yeah, exactly.
I know we're over time, guys, but I'm going to keep going here with a couple of questions since this is recorded. So I assume the Smart-1 Cloud policy has to be a blank plate before you do your import. It won't do an append.
That is correct. So if you do the import, actually, Thank you for bringing that up. I did not mention this, but as you do that upload process and you import on top of Smart-1 Cloud from your on-prem environment, there's a warning that will flash up saying, hey, this is going to overwrite whatever you have right now. So be sure that you're okay with that. And that's also maybe kind of what I mean when I say the point of no return, because once you import whatever you had there, whether it was testing or you were maybe building out a policy separately, that goes away. So be very careful and be sure that you're ready to commit to the policy that you're importing over top of what's there already.
Okay. When Smart-1 Cloud gets upgraded or patched, you mentioned that you don't have to, customers don't have to worry about that process anymore. Do they get warnings? Is the system impacted? How is that process?
Yes, great question. So there is a maintenance window that occurs. I believe there's a non-service impacting window weekly, and then I believe there is a small impacting window monthly or every couple of months. I can't remember exactly what it is, but there is a listed SK inside of our environment that I can certainly append to the to the recording or email out to everybody that says when you should expect to have maintenance. But outside of that, if there was some sort of critical, unexpected downtime sort of maintenance window, the best thing there would be to check status.checkpoint.com for any kind of unplanned maintenance. And I believe I've seen actually proactive notifications in the past whenever there's been something that's come up. But typically it's going to be in that usual cadence of weekly non-impacting, monthly small impacting, and then outside of that, of course, would be status.checkpoint.com.
Okay. Paul asked, hi, Paul, I haven't talked to you in a while. Now we're chatting. How are the gateway updates or patching or upgrades handled to stay in sync with the management?
Okay. Yeah. So the management server obviously again is maintained by Checkpoint. It's updated, it's patched as needed. The gateways themselves are going to still be maintained and owned by you as the user, the customer, the administrator. So as of right now, our backwards compatibility with 81.20 from a management server perspective goes all the way back to 80.10 at least. So that's pretty well unsupported at this point, unfortunately. But if there would ever be a version that the management server was moving to in the cloud that would directly impact your version of the gateway, that would be something that I would expect it would be informing you of. At the same time, I would say it's a good exercise to always sort of have your mind and your eyes on what version you're running on premise in case you do need to upgrade, and plan for that with sufficient time in a maintenance window. But in answer to the direct question, managing the gateway's software version and hotfix take numbers, that's going to be something that you maintain 100% as the user. That is not something that Checkpoint is going to push down from the management server itself.
Right. It's the same process that you would be doing today.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
And yeah, major version upgrades obviously are not going to occur that much, but the management patching and stuff does not directly impact the gateway patching.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Oh, you mentioned a timing question.
Yeah.
You mentioned when you hit that button and you run the script, it'll take about an hour. And you had like a little policy there. So what if you had a huge policy?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the script that runs on the management server to do the migrate export, that actually can vary pretty wildly in terms of how long it takes. Mine only took 6 minutes to do the export, but the import into Smart-1 Cloud, once I had that tar gzip file, that took about an hour for me. So the good news is the migrate export, as long as you're going from 81.20 to 81.20, there is no impact on the management server. It just sort of runs in the background. The same story would be true going into Smart-1 Cloud. It's a process that, as long as you're not actively making any policy or config changes in Smart Console, that will take Sure, a section of time that could be pretty considerable. I would imagine that the more policy rules you have, the more complexity of a configuration, it's going to take longer. I don't have a way to give you an estimate on exactly how long it would take, but I would say plan for at least maybe a 2-hour window altogether, from the beginning of running the export script all the way to beginning to attach the gateways in Smart-1 Cloud.
Yeah. And obviously nothing's impacted while this is going on. Your current environment is still running. So
Correct.
right.
Correct. The only impact that I'm aware of is if you were going from 80.40 on your Smart-1 on-premise system to Smart-1 Cloud, which is presumably running 81.20. That's where the CP stop gets invoked on the on-prem management server, which will impact logging, as well as things like certificate-based remote access authentication for users.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, covered it, Michael. I know we went fairly
Yeah, we're a little bit over.
Good questions.
Yeah, great questions, guys. And gals, if there are any. I just wanted to briefly recap quick and say, hey, our policy push did succeed. This is now the new policy date timestamp here. If I were to go back over to my policy inside of Smart-1 Cloud and open up the streamed version instead, notice that I'm taking over here. I should be able to see that NAT rule that was added using the native Smart Console. And sure enough, here it is. So I'm now back inside of my portal. If I were to go to logs, for instance, I should now be seeing log entries coming in from those gateways delivered up to Smart-1 Cloud. So I just wanted to briefly showcase that, as we've made these changes and the policy itself has completed running here, we are pretty much at this point. I would say this is a completed maintenance window. It's successful. We're seeing the information that we want to see. Hopefully I can get this to show up here in a moment before we wrap things up. But that is really the process. And as long as you have those clustered gateways being reattached, SIC is still successful. You're able to validate those things. There's really not a whole lot else that you need to be terribly concerned with. And here we are. So here I have a timestamp that's from just a moment ago. And sure enough, this is my gateway. Private address here, 5.1.142, going all the way up to, actually, this is a checkpoint service. So it's one of those dynamically updating objects. So yeah, again, sorry to kind of rush here at the end, but I would say that this looks precisely like what we would be looking for. So that is the content that I had for you today. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for all the great questions that you asked. And Rob, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Great information. I hope that was helpful for everybody. And of course, like always, you have further questions, you can reach out to us or talk to your local engineer. We'll be happy to help you guys out. With that, we'll let you go. Follow-up email will be going out with all the reference content and the recording link. Our next session will be in 2 weeks. That will be on a quantum and light speed roadmap items. So that should give us some view into what's coming soon from the quantum line. So join us here in 2 weeks for that information. But that will let you go. So Michael, thank you again. Everybody, thank you for joining, and we'll see you here next time.
All
Bye
right.
all.
Thanks, everyone.